So yesterday I went to New York, went to the Natural History Museum, ate at a nice restaurant, that sort of thing. And while I was at the gift shop of the museum, I saw that they were actually selling these giant Sequoia saplings. And they were decently priced. It was like $13. I thought, it's not too bad. Checked online, they were like $6 on Amazon. Wasn't exactly having buyer's remorse because it still seemed pretty reasonable. I mean, I got to pick out the sapling, made sure it was healthy, so that's worth some money. Shipping, these have to be kept up right. I don't exactly trust shipping to get that part right, so that's worth quite a bit. And I was supporting the museum, so I don't mind the upcharge. So I got one, and today I'm gonna plant it. Alright, so here it is, out of the plastic casing. Looks pretty healthy. Now I already looked up all the growing conditions this plant needs. That's important. And next you guys see this, it's going to be in a pot. And there we go. Might prune these lower branches in a bit, but other than that, all that's left is to water and wait. Now, this plant isn't going to grow as tall or as big as the ones on the West Coast, because apparently the summers are too humid here. And that brings up an important point. This plant is not native to this region. In fact, it's native to California, which would make this an introduced species. So, is this dangerous? Is this going to become an invasive species? The answer to this is almost certainly no. Not every introduced species is invasive. This species requires very special conditions to spread its seeds. It actually requires a small forest fire in order for the seed pods to open and for the seeds to fall down to the earth. And even in its native habitat of California, that's becoming difficult. So no, this isn't really a risk of becoming a new invasive species. The museum likely wouldn't have sold it if there was a risk. In fact, there are many giant sequoias planted all over the globe, and some of them do better than others, but none of them are really at risk of becoming the next invasive species. Generally speaking, an introduced species is invasive when it harms the environment, usually by making it more difficult for native plants and animals to survive. A lot of the species in this forest, which would otherwise be full of native plants, are invasive. That includes the garlic mustard and dandelion over there, as well as oriental bittersweets over there. That is a broadleaf stalk plant that's invasive. I am almost certain that that plant is invasive. This is a rose plant, but not a native one. It's a white rose, not a Virginia pink rose. And in fact, it's a lot harder to find native species, except when you look up and into the tree line. Large trees tend to not be as invasive, as they take a long time to grow, and in order for an introduced tree to grow up and then spread its seeds, and for those to grow up and spread its seeds and start taking land away from these native varieties, it would take a long time, several centuries in fact. So conservation efforts to remove invasive trees would be quite successful. However, plants that produce dozens or even hundreds of seeds after only a year or two of growing have a much greater potential to be invasive. There is also some blurring of the line between introduced and invasive. Like in this wineberry here, where it is most certainly introduced, but whether or not it's harming the environment is up for some debate. There is some risk that wineberries could push out native species such as black raspberries and red raspberries, but that risk is less than with other species. As it is, these raspberries and blackberries compete for space with one another and with other plants, so they're very well adapted to this sort of competition. Even without the non-native wineberry, there are already several species of native raspberries and blackberries that are all vying for the same space. And even with the non-native wineberry added to the competition, it's not on top. these Allegheny blackberries grow larger and tend to be more aggressive in their growth. So yes, not all introduced species are invasive. In fact, many people's gardens are filled with introduced plants. That said, some of those are invasive, and if you're planting, you should check to make sure that you're not planting any hyper-invasive plants, but almost all of the plants in gardens tend to be introduced, and most of them are relatively fine. And the giant sequoia falls into that same category. Is it introduced? Yes. Is it going to become invasive? Well, only time will tell, but I'd say chances are very, very slim. Well, I hope you all enjoyed. See ya.